Welcome, this is your 5-minute geography lesson. We're covering Theme 2, Element 2, Counter-urbanisation. Hands up, I'm Mr S and I'll be your 5-minute teacher. Urbanisation is the process of moving from the rural areas into the urban areas, so moving from the countryside into the city. So that stands to reason that counter-urbanisation is the opposite of this. Often people are in search of a more peaceful lifestyle, with city dwellers packing up their things and moving out into the countryside. And this does have some negative impacts for the rural areas. So let's have a look. Urbanisation has been happening for hundreds of years now. There's loads of people over that time have moved into the cities, to the point where now more than 50% of the population of our entire planet now lives in a city or an urban area. But in more developed countries such as the UK, in the last 20 years, we've seen a lot more people doing the opposite. People are moving out of the city into the countryside. And let's have a look at why. So we can split this into broadly 5 different factors. And the first one we're going to have a look at is the idea of families. Now, young families, so we've got mum, dad, and maybe 1 or 2 kids. If you're in a city, housing is really, really expensive. It's also incredibly small. You're unlikely to have a garden. Maybe it's a small yard. And a lot of families would want to have a lot of space, maybe it's a garden to play with their kids, and the opportunity to go out into maybe a park or an area to play. And that is not seen as a good location inside a rural area. So they end up moving to the countryside where there's more space, so the houses are bigger, more rooms in them, they've got a bigger garden, and it doesn't take too long to end up in a park or in a couple of fields. Then we've also got the idea of there's been improvements to transport and infrastructure. So we've seen over the last few decades massive improvements in terms of motorway access, train lines, and reliability of public transport has now made it easier to live outside of the city. Cars are more economical and less expensive to run, and therefore it's easier to live outside of the city and commute in every day than it is to actually have to afford a house inside the city. We've also got an improvement in communication and technology. So it's no longer the case that you have to live right next to where you work. With the improvements such as high-speed internet, you don't even have to be at a location in work. I'm recording this during the coronavirus outbreak and we're in lockdown, and there are a lot of people today now working from home. And that's only been possible because we can communicate with anybody around the world. You don't have to be face-to-face. Internet has meant that we can do a lot more from our own homes. So if you can do that, you don't actually need to be in your place of work to work in a lot of businesses. So improved internet connection in rural areas means it's now possible for many to work from home, eliminating the need to stay in the city. And then we've got this idea of decentralization of jobs. And this is linked back to the transport and the technology improvements. Once upon a time, from the Industrial Revolution onwards, if you owned a business or if you wanted to start a business up, you would have to set up inside the city because that's where most of the workers were going to be. Well, today that's no longer the case, and building in the city is very expensive. So instead, what businesses are doing now are moving out to the edge of the city or right into the countryside because it's cheaper to build there, and because you've got access to technology. Some of your workers might be able to work from home, and you can communicate around the world in an instance through high-speed internet. But also your workers can use really reliable public transport, or they can use cars because the road networks are so good, they can get there regardless of where that location actually is. And then finally, we've got this idea of the rural idyll. Now, an idyll is a romantic idealization of what a place might look like. So when you think of the rural areas, you probably think of calm, quiet, no crime, just a really peaceful lifestyle. And that attracts a lot of people to that area. And the city is often seen as being noisy, busy, a lot of crime, dirty, full of pollution. So this often attracts more older people close to or at retirement who want a clear, more peaceful lifestyle in their later years. Well, moving on to how that impacts. So a lot of people actually end up in a problem when you live in the rural area, or if you've always lived in the rural area, with something called second homes. So what this is, with people who live in the cities, they might earn enough money where they think, actually, I want to spend a bit of my time each year in the countryside, and they buy a home, but they only go there for maybe a month or 2 months at a time. Now that's actually increasing the demand for housing in that rural area. So the price of those houses goes up. And if you live in the countryside all year round, you get a job there. Usually jobs are less well paying than they are in the city. So you can't afford to buy a really expensive house. So you get priced out of your own village or your own town because second homes are increasing the prices of them. There can also be a decline in the local economy. And this is actually linked back to second homes as well. So some people might live in the countryside, but because they work in the city, it just makes more sense that you do your shopping there because there's more choice and all that leisure activity out there as well. And the result is that your local shops, your local economy suffers because not as many people are now using them, even though loads of people are living in the area. And that links to second homes because if you're only in the house for a month of the year, that house is sitting vacant, not being used. People aren't coming into the local shop because most of the houses are just stood empty for the majority of the year. Country roads tend to be narrower, so they're not proper dual lanes of traffic, and that causes problems on its own in terms of congestion. Lots of people trying to get down these narrow roads at once, but it also adds to the noise and air pollution along with that as well. And then we have pressure on services. You've got smaller service availability in the countryside anyway because it's typically always been low populations. But as more people come in, that's going to put increased pressure on things like schools, the ability for a school to take on more people, but also on thinking of healthcare. So being able to see a GP, how long would you have to wait to see a GP as the population keeps getting bigger in your rural area? Or are there enough hospital beds? Or can you get an appointment to see a consultant for whatever medical need that you might have? All of this goes up as more population starts to make its way into the rural area. That brings our lesson to an end. We'll continue at your own pace by completing the now tried tasks for homework. Class dismissed.